Hello and welcome back to the Worcester Senior Center Stay Connected Programming Station, Channel 192. My name is Linda Winsek Moore and I am the Senior Services and Education Manager at the Worcester Senior Center. Joining us today is nurse attorney Cathleen Summers from Generations Law Group. With over 25 years of legal experience, Cathleen concentrates her legal practice on crisis planning, Medicaid and long-term care planning, estate planning, and guardianship. She is the go-to expert on helping clients and their families navigate the legal and healthcare worlds when a crisis occurs. She specializes in crisis management and often supports families who are unable to provide frequent oversight of a loved one's care. Cathleen is often sought out by professionals to serve as an advisor to local hospitals and be a member of several boards in the community. Kathleen currently serves as Vice President of the Massachusetts chapter of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. Today, Attorney Summers will discuss protecting vulnerable seniors from financial exploitation. Attorney Kathleen Summers discusses seniors who fall victim to scammers, unethical family members, and even to themselves. The characteristics and warning signs of a vulnerable senior will be reviewed, along with examples of how each category of perpetrator outsiders, family members, and themselves harm the senior and the negative effects it can have on their all-around well-being. She will address the many ways vulnerable seniors can put legal safeguards in place through pre-planning and steps that can be taken in the midst of a crisis. Finally, Attorney Summers will discuss community and other resources that are available. Welcome, Attorney Summers.
Well, thank you, Linda, very much for introducing me, and thank you to the Worcester Senior Center for inviting me to be here, as well as the Worcester Cable TV station for taping us today. Today I'm going to talk about scams, and particularly how scams affect seniors. So give me a moment. Let me go ahead and bring up the PowerPoint so you all can have a chance to take a look at the presentation this morning. So again, I'm Kathleen Summers, and I'm a nurse attorney with Generations Law Group, and we do a lot of work with seniors. And one of the things that we really have noticed increasing over the last few years is the number of scams that seniors are having to deal with and are really facing out there. So today I really want to go through a couple of things with everyone. First, I want to start with an overview of the issue and give everyone a little taste for what's happening throughout the country in terms of scams. Then I'm going to talk about the different types of scams that we're seeing, and to give everyone some tools to help, hopefully to protect not only yourself, but maybe loved ones that you're dealing with in terms of scams. So why don't we start with some statistics, because scamming is really becoming a much larger issue that all of us are dealing with, and we're seeing an increased number of scams targeted against seniors, including additional types of scams that are coming out during this pandemic that we're all dealing with. So one of the things to know is that about $2.9 billion are lost annually to scams. That's an enormous amount of money across the country. So scamming hits people of all ages, of all demographics. It's really a major issue that we have to deal with. And the number one scam that we have seen over the past year is the IRS scam. That's the one a lot of people have heard about, being contacted, being asked for personal information by the IRS. And trying to get Social Security information, Social Security number information, bank account information. And one thing to remember, and we'll talk about this again, is the IRS will never call you on the phone. And just a little side, Kansas City had done a review of the types of scams that their population were dealing with. And what they found is that 1 in every 24 cases of elder exploitation is reported, which means that 23 cases out of every 24 are not reported. So the numbers are much greater than what we're going to talk about here in terms of the statistics. and that 1 in every 10 Americans over the age of 65 who live at home will become a victim to a scam. And so again, it is rampant out there, the types of scams and the numbers of scams that we're dealing with. So let me start with what a vulnerable senior looks like. And I think you'll be surprised because there is no typical definition of a vulnerable senior. The truth is that we can all be vulnerable at certain times and depending on the circumstances. But let me talk a little bit about some of the things that increase vulnerability. First, age. Now, age alone is not a determining factor in terms of vulnerability, but as we age, we tend to be more vulnerable to these types of situations. Certainly, we've seen scams that have hit people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, but age is certainly a factor in vulnerability around scams. Part of it is because as we age, getting used to using things like the computers, understanding the new technology that is flooding us on a regular basis and the constant change is definitely something that as we age can become a little bit more difficult to deal with. One of the bigger factors than age is really isolation. When we are dealing with clients or seniors that we have seen who have been the victim of a scam, those who are isolated, who don't have a strong support network, people who are checking in on them, that they're able to discuss their concerns with, etc., tend to be more vulnerable in terms of these types of issues. Certainly, as you begin to lose cognitive ability, so dementia, other forms of cognitive issues can make you more vulnerable to scamming opportunities. Trusting. One of the things that we find, particularly around older individuals, is that they tend to be very trusting of authority. So when someone calls you and says, I'm from the IRS, or I'm from the electric company and we're going to turn off your power. We actually had clients who dealt with that. I happened to be in their home at the time that it occurred. And they got a call from the quote unquote electric company who said they were going to shut their power off at 5 o'clock that night unless they got payment. And a lot of times, particularly older generations, tend to trust authority figures. And when someone tells you they are from an organization like the IRS, like your bank, etc., we will give information to them even though we can't verify their identity. People who are extremely dependent. So one of the classifications that we're going to talk about in terms of who perpetrates scams, people who are very dependent on caregivers, maybe on a family member who has worked to isolate them from other family members, can be more vulnerable to scamming. And one of the things we see with that makes someone more vulnerable to scams is embarrassment. We have noticed that when people are the victim of a scam, they're oftentimes very reluctant to talk about it. It's embarrassing. They don't want to share it with anyone else that they have lost money or that they have been taken in. And that goes back to that statistic about the number of scams that are actually go unreported throughout the country because people oftentimes are embarrassed to share what has happened to them and of what they've ended up losing in terms of the scamming situation. So why don't we move forward now and talk about the different types of scams that we see out there? And there are really kind of three categories that we put them into. The first one I'm going to talk about are stranger scams. These are perpetrated by people who you don't know. The next group are family and friends, and we'll talk a little bit about how this group can also perpetrate scams. And then I'm going to talk about the individual themselves, the senior themselves, and how their actions or failure, quite frankly, to act oftentimes makes them much more vulnerable to scamming concerns and scamming situations. So let's talk about stranger scams first. That's one that a lot of people think about. Again, going back to a phone call that you might receive from the IRS saying that we either have money for you that we're trying to get back to you, or you owe us money and we're going to arrest you if you don't take care of the bill that is owed. Very, very frequently, these calls are coming in through telephones, whether it be your landline or more frequently now through people's cell phones. Telephone scams are still one of the biggest issues that we deal with. Again, I had that issue with a client who received the phone call from the utility company saying that they would shut off their utility. One thing to always remember, these government agencies will not call you. Your bank will not call you and ask you for your personal information. They will not call you and ask you to verify your account number. The utility companies will not call you in order to be able to get payment. All of the communication with these organizations should be done by mail, and they should be done in a way in which you're not revealing personal information in order to be able to find out the nature of the issue that they're trying to reach you about. Charity scams are another one. People posing to be charitable organizations. We see this a lot in the business environment through email, getting email contact by someone claiming to be either in need of help or a charitable organization asking for monies. Again, they can also come through on the telephone, and my recommendation would be never to give to a charity over the phone in response to a call to you. The computer internet scams that I talked about, more and more of these are being seen all the time, in which you'll get an email from someone claiming to be in trouble and asking you to be able to help them, or claiming that they have monies that they've come into, and if you would just do X, Y, and Z, usually that's if you would just pay money in order to get their money cleared through a bank, they'll go ahead and give you a percentage of that. So computer internet scams are becoming really an issue. Identity theft has always been an issue. This is where someone gets enough information about you that they're able to steal your identity, to be able to utilize your social security number, possibly go ahead and set up new accounts under your number and under your name, to be able to get credit accounts like credit cards, MasterCard, Visa, that they've been able to falsely obtain utilizing your identity. One thing that a lot of people don't think about is medical identity theft. This is where someone, again, is able to obtain enough information about you that they're able to claim under your insurance, whether that be private insurance or under Medicare or Medicaid. One of the things we're going to talk about, but oftentimes, people get in the mail a benefit statement. It's called an explanation of benefits that comes through and says, this is not a bill, but have you received services by this provider and on this date? And checking those explanation of benefits is really important to make sure that you're not seeing any claims go through under your name, under your Medicare or Social Security number to a provider. And again, this may be an opportunity for someone to be claiming benefits under your identity. Another thing we see are romance scams. This is what another word for this is called catfishing. This is unfortunately a side effect that we see through some of the dating sites in which someone has put up a false profile and they've been able to then contact or be contacted by somebody who may be looking for companionship. And because they have created this false profile, they end up then being able to develop a relationship with someone, and oftentimes the purpose of that relationship is just to obtain money. And then we talked about the IRS impersonation scams, and again, being one of the largest ones that we've seen recently. This is one that most people have heard about, and always remember the IRS will never contact you by phone. One thing I wanted to add that I don't have a slide on really are some scams that we've seen around the whole COVID environment. With this pandemic that we're all dealing with, unfortunately, people have utilized it as an opportunity to be able to scam others. We've seen it around the availability of supplies. I can get you hand sanitizers and Clorox wipes and the coveted toilet paper for a large amount of money. If you pay me a large amount of money, I will get those items for you. Scams around testing. If you pay a certain amount of money, we'll get you tested, and we can also give you treatment for COVID. That's another one we've seen, that we can provide you with some kind of treatment for COVID if you pay money. So being very leery of this, certainly at this point, as we all know, there is no treatment out there, and utilizing appropriate methods of being able to obtain supplies that you need or to be able to get medical follow-up. Don't trust anything that you're seeing on the Facebook or on internet or on computer email that talks about quick ways of being able to deal with this COVID pandemic. So why don't we switch gears now, and we've talked about the stranger scams that a lot of people, again, are more aware of out there. And let's talk about the scams that we've seen perpetrated by family and friends. Oftentimes, this is an area where people are not aware that, they're relying on their family, they're relying on people that are around them to provide them with assistance. And it can be, in some circumstances, an opportunity for someone to be able to scam. So one of the first things that we see, it's always about financial exploitation, or usually about financial exploitation and trying to take advantage of someone. So the things that raise red flags for us, and should raise red flags for you if you are dealing with someone who you're concerned about in terms of their vulnerability. When someone is being pressured to give someone else authority over their finances, I'm going to help you with that. Just give me privileges to be able to write your checks for you. Now, we're going to talk about when this is an appropriate thing to give to someone through something called a durable power of attorney. And relying on our loved ones is absolutely something that most of us do and can do without any issue. But we always want to be aware when someone is pressuring another. And it oftentimes comes with more than just one thing. It's not just giving someone the authority to handle finances and to help you with paying the bills, but if this person is also isolating you from other family members or other friends, and maybe organizations that you've been a part of and working with. It's always multiple things that we see when someone is working to make sure that they are the only ones who are providing benefit or service for you and helping you out. So if you see that a loved one is starting to be isolated, that there are new people who may have come into their lives to help them out, and suddenly they have a lot of authority to be able to manage things for this person. These are all the things that raise some red flag concerns to take a little bit more of a look to determine what might be happening. An individual who's caring for somebody who's spending money on themselves rather on the person for whom they are supposed to be providing benefit for. We actually had a client situation in which a couple had given the power of attorney to their son. He was their only child, and he was there to try to help them pay bills. Unfortunately, the son also had his own issues. He had been spending money in ways that he couldn't sustain his lifestyle, and he began to take money from his parents to the point where he had taken so much money from them that they no longer were able to sustain their own needs, couldn't maintain their home anymore, couldn't provide for or pay for the caregivers that they needed to be able to stay in their home. So he really worked to isolate them from other people. He made sure that they no longer were involved with the longtime friends who they had always had a relationship with, and began to siphon money off for himself. And this can happen, that someone may begin with good intentions, but then because of their own life events, because of their own moral compass, no longer are providing the way they should for that senior. And so it's always a combination of things, the authority to be able to manage someone's funds and the beginning to isolate them from the people who they've been used to having as part of their life and support system. Another thing that we see is that someone who begins to make changes to the beneficial designations of an individual's accounts. So for instance, if you have a retirement account or you have a life insurance policy, typically those accounts have named beneficiaries. And oftentimes those named beneficiaries have been there for a long time. When we see changes to those beneficiaries that happen for questionable reasons or because of new relationships, and again, a working to isolate that person from their past relationships, this can be a red flag for us to take a look at things. Again, when I talked about isolating this person, controlling their social life, making determinations about who they can see, who they can't see. We actually had a client who the scammers gave that individual a cell phone. You can now get those disposable cell phones, and they gave this individual a cell phone and were contacting her through this specific cell phone. So it was a way of continuing to contact her, doing it in a way that wasn't being flagged for the people around her because they didn't realize she had a second cell phone. And they continued to scam her, and in the end scammed her out of about $70,000 of monies. And so when you look at a loved one, you looked at what's happening in the situation, you want to look for these red flag changes that may indicate that they are being subjected to kind of undue influence from a family or friend. And then let me skip now to really discussing the types of scams that we make ourselves vulnerable to, or that the failure to do certain things makes us more vulnerable to scamming. So the first thing is, not being willing to plan ahead. This can be really difficult. Most of us put our head in the sand and we don't want to think about changes in our health and what will happen as we age. But what we found is that people who don't plan, who don't do some looking as to what the future may bring, and think about the different options that they may have and the different situations that they may find acceptable, are more susceptible to scamming. Because when you fail to plan and then some kind of crisis happens, you are more vulnerable by nature. And it's amazing to me how scammers just seem to be able to find individuals who are in these vulnerable situations. Talked about the embarrassment of talking about being the victim of a scam. That really becomes something that makes you more vulnerable as time goes on. Failure to want to talk about it, failure to bring it forward and to say, I think something's happening here, makes you again more susceptible to continually being scammed or for the current scam to continue to happen. Fear of retaliation is a big one. I talked about the woman who had been given the cell phone. This was actually a situation in which she had been contacted by individuals who lived overseas, who had begun to tell her about the problems they were having in their family, the problems they were having with money. She was in a situation in which she lived alone. She was beginning to deal with dementia, although certainly was able to continue to provide for herself and to take care of her own needs, but she was starting to have some problems with dementia setting in. They found her, they began to talk with her. She was isolated, and so she loved to have this opportunity to be able to talk to someone and to have a connection. She did have two children who were involved in her life, but they both lived across the country and had their own families, their own work, and did not recognize what was starting to happen with her as she was living here alone and began to not have a support system any longer here. When they began the scam, they did it in the typical way, giving her a phone call and talking to her about the monies that they needed, and she thought she would help them out, and she made a small donation to their organization. Well, the calls continued. They continued to harass her for more money. They became more frequent and more intense in terms of the issues that they were explaining to her and telling her about. When her daughters did start to realize what happened and they began to take steps to remove the ability to reach her by cell phone, this group sent her by mail her own phone that only they had the number to, and they continued again to harass her on a regular basis for money. And one of the things that they did was use this fear of retaliation. You know, the more they got to know her, the more they then talked about the fact that they knew where she lived and that they knew how to get, how to reach her, and that they would take action against her if she stopped sending the money. So it really became a fearful situation for her in terms of dealing with these individuals. One of the things, again, to always remember is that giving out personal information about yourself is, you always want to question when someone is asking you for this information. Why are they asking you for your social security number? Is it for a legitimate reason? And again, shouldn't be something that's done over the phone unless you've initiated that contact and you understand what the purpose is. Credit card information, same way. I mean, in today's world, certainly we're using our credit cards more and more. You're able to buy things online. You're able to call someone and give a credit card over the phone for them to be able to, verify a purchase. And again, as long as you understand why you're doing that and that you're doing so purposefully, then it's okay to be able to give that information. Otherwise, never give it over the phone. You always want to make sure that you know why you're doing it and to whom you're giving that information. It's better, if possible, to always make sure it's being done by some kind of communication that you've initiated, and then in writing, or when we do get back to a new normal in person with people, to be able to give that information. And one of the last things that we really see that add to someone's vulnerability to scams is refusing help. When you've got an issue going on that you need more help in terms of handling, let's say, your finances, in dealing with a situation, and if you've begun to become vulnerable or you've begun to experience an actual scam, refusing to talk about it and refusing help to deal with the situation makes you continually vulnerable to ongoing scams and potentially new scams. So talking about it when you can, if something happens to you, sharing that information with appropriate people, and accepting help when appropriate is really important. And taking steps, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about some steps that you can take to protect your own information when possible. So one of the things that we look at is, are scams or, is financial exploitation elder abuse? And yes, it is. And there are resources out there to really be able to help. All of the towns and cities in the police departments have officers and departments that are really sensitized to these scamming issues. And so certainly that is a group that you can reach out to. The elder care corporations in each of our towns or catchment areas, our senior centers have a lot of resources that they can help direct you who to contact if you feel either you've been the victim of a scam or you have a loved one who's been a victim of a scam. We actually, in the elder corporations, have an elder abuse hotline that can be called. The state has an elder abuse hotline as well that you can reach out to report a concern. If you feel that someone may be subject to scamming and increased vulnerability, they can go out and investigate the situation and see whether there is reason to be concerned. So yes, it is a form of elder abuse and it should be viewed that way. And we want to make sure that we bring in all the appropriate resources to be able to fight this when we can. So now I want to talk a little bit about how pre-planning can really help someone in terms of reducing their vulnerability to scam, and some resources for everyone to be able to consider. So let's talk about the documents these are the legal documents that someone should consider putting in place ahead of time. And I'm going to talk about the documents themselves and how they really help to reduce the vulnerability that someone may be experiencing or someone may have in the future. First is the healthcare proxy. This is a document in which you name somebody to step into your shoes to make healthcare decisions for you if you become incompetent or incapacitated. So remember, if you're capable of making your own healthcare decisions and you're competent to do so, then your healthcare decisions are the ones that stand. But by naming somebody ahead of time to be able to make those decisions for you, should you become incompetent or incapacitated, you're ensuring that your wishes are going to be followed. So remember, with a healthcare proxy, you're giving someone authority to make a wide range of healthcare decisions on your behalf. You want to make sure that you have a conversation with them, that you really give them an understanding of what's important to you around healthcare decision making. For instance, would you want to be put on a ventilator or not? Would you want to have a feeding tube or not? These are the kinds of decisions. Do you want to be resuscitated and under what conditions? That you really should talk about with your named proxy so that they know what the framework for decision making is should you become incompetent or unable to make those decisions for yourself in the future. The other reason to put the healthcare proxy in place is that you've assured the person that you want to be that decision maker is recognized and named, and that you don't end up in some kind of a court proceeding, and that's the guardianship and conservatorship proceeding that I've listed here, in which now a court is making decisions about who your decision maker will be and what the scope of the decisions will be that they make on your behalf. I've oftentimes been appointed as someone's guardian by the court and have had to be in the position of making healthcare decisions for somebody who I had never met prior to them becoming incompetent or incapacitated. So healthcare proxy is really critical to make sure that your wishes are followed should you be unable to make decisions. The next document is called a durable power of attorney. This is a document that names someone to step into your shoes to handle all other decisions for you but healthcare. It's really a financial tool. And so this is a document that you would put in place and you would ask a trusted individual to step into your shoes if needed to be able to handle your financial world, pay your bills, take care of your finances, to make sure your investments and your retirement plans, that your taxes are paid, all of those important financial decisions. Again, it's giving somebody a lot of authority, but it's giving them authority, first of all, the person who you want to be that named proxy. You're deciding who's going to be the one to manage things should you not be able to handle them for yourself. And you're giving them, you can control the amount of authority they do or don't have. And so you're able within that power of attorney to be able to limit authority where you don't want someone to be able to make changes. For instance, if you decide to give someone the power of attorney on your behalf, but you don't want them to be able to make changes to your beneficial designations on your retirement plans or your life insurance, you can limit that within the document. There may be good reasons why you shouldn't limit that, but you do have that authority if you chose. And so you can really make it so that you have reduced your vulnerability in the future should you not be able to handle your own finances. And again, you've chosen the person that you want to be in that position, and you're not relying on some court proceeding like a conservatorship to have someone appointed who you may not want to be in that position, or you may not know. And then the last documents that we see as a way of helping to protect an individual from vulnerability are trusts. Trusts are documents, there's lots of types of trusts out there, but the main type of trust that I'm thinking about is what we call a revocable or revocable trust. This is one that you control while you're alive. So you put your assets like your home, your bank accounts, your investment accounts into that trust while you're alive. You are the one who controls that trust, and you are the beneficiary of that trust. But what the trust does is it names a successor trustee. So a trustee is the one who manages and controls the trust, should you be unable to do that for yourself. So like the power of attorney, it gives the successor trustee the ability to manage your assets for your benefit while you're alive. And then it provides for instruction on what to do with your assets after you've passed away. So you're again controlling who is named in that document and what type of control they have and what you're asking them to do with the assets. And doing that ahead of time allows you to ensure that the people you want in those important positions are named. So to really wrap things up, first thing we want people to always think about is to be proactive where they can. So in taking a look at things like your monthly financial statements that you may get, your credit card statements, it's really important that you review those. And oftentimes the financial institutions have a time frame around your review. It's usually 30 days. So you need to take a look at your bank accounts and see, is there any suspicious activity? Are there deposits, withdrawals from that account that were not yours and that you don't know where they came from? Has there been any suspicious activity on your credit card statements? Purchases of items that you haven't approved, even return of items that you haven't approved. These things can all raise red flags that there is maybe some vulnerability around your financial or credit card accounts that you need to take a look at. And again, you oftentimes have a time frame in order to be able to dispute those activities and be able to recover. So if you saw a suspicious withdrawal from your account, reporting it to your bank in a timely manner is imperative to give you the best opportunity to be able to get that money back again. I had talked about the medical vulnerability and the medical scams that happen. Reviewing those Medicare summary notices that you get in the mail or the explanation of benefits. Most of us throw those away. They're just extra paper that we're getting on a monthly basis, and they say not a bill on top, and so we don't pay attention. But it's really important to take a look. Who is being given monies from these organizations for care that they're claiming that you received? Because it can be the first opportunity that you see that someone may have your information and may be claiming benefits under your information. So looking at those is really important. Shred your documents when you can. Most of us now can get those little shredders at home that you can use, and a lot of organizations, financial institutions, banks will sometimes, once or twice a year have a large shredding day in which you can bring a larger volume of material. But making sure that you just don't throw away your bank statements or throw away Medicare notices. Federal government's gotten much better about not putting full Social Security numbers or not even utilizing the Social Security number anymore as the basis of your identification. But a lot of things still do rely on your Social Security number. And so making sure you shred those documents and don't give someone the opportunity of being able to find out that information about you. Think about things too, anything with your date of birth on it. One of the interesting things that we see when I go through Facebook these days is a lot of times there are those questions that someone else posts. Let's share information about ourselves. Where did you go to high school? What was your father's middle name? What was your favorite first animal or your favorite book? These are oftentimes the security questions that financial institutions use in order to be able to back up your identity. So when you go into your bank account and you've forgotten your password, they'll sometimes ask you security questions. And if you can answer those security questions, then you can access the account. So be really careful about using or answering those kinds of surveys on Facebook or providing those kinds of bits of information to anybody, because they oftentimes are being used as the basis of security questions and then can be used to be able to access information about you. Use direct deposit wherever you can. Most of us now know Social Security has made a huge effort to direct deposit people's benefit checks and not to be providing these checks by mail any longer. And of course, the concern there is that checks, unfortunately, are able to be taken out of people's mailboxes and be able to try to use them or try to be able to cash them elsewhere. So direct deposit when you can. This goes for all of your, any kind of monies that you might be receiving. So pension payments, direct payments from a retirement organization, anything like that. The more often that you can direct deposit it into an account and not have a live check out there, the better it is. Check your cell phone before you answer. Check your home line before you answer. If you're able to have some identifying information that comes up regarding the number that is calling you, look at that. If you don't know the number, the recommendation is don't answer. If it's an important call, they'll leave you a message. The scammers have tried to leave messages too, we've found lately. I actually went home myself one day and had one of those scamming IRS calls on my home voicemail, trying to tell me that I had to call before 5 o'clock that day or they were going to send out the constable to arrest me. And so check those numbers. Don't call back numbers that you don't know. There are other ways for people to get a hold of you, and answering those numbers, again, oftentimes just makes you more vulnerable to potential scams. Another thing that we see is what's called a credit freeze. There are 3 major credit organizations that deal with most of our credit information. And one of the ways that you can help to protect yourself is you can contact them and freeze your credit. Now, this is a little bit of pain because if you purposely decide that you want to activate your credit, so let's say you've frozen your credit and you now are going out to buy a new car, and you now have to unfreeze your credit in order to allow for the automobile organization to be able to provide you with a loan if that's the way that you're going. So it is a little bit of a pain to have to unfreeze, but by freezing your credit, you are making it so that no one else can access your information as well to be able to verify or obtain some kind of a credit card under your name, under your identity. So you can take the proactive step of freezing your credit. and only unfreezing it when you want to do a certain type of transaction, like obtaining a new credit card or obtaining financing on something, and then you would refreeze your credit with the different organizations again. So those are all some ways that you can think about being proactive, as well as putting in place those decision makers that we talked about before, making sure you have updated healthcare proxies and your powers of attorney so that you're in control of who would be stepping into your shoes should there be a need in the future, and you're not leaving it to chance. So I hope that was helpful to everybody. I really enjoyed the opportunity to be able to speak with you, and I wish you all well.
Thank you, Attorney Summers, for that wonderful program. And I would like to remind everyone to stay safe, stay hydrated, and stay connected by watching the Worcester Senior Center's Stay Connected programming on Channel 192. Thank you.